It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Doomed to fail, President Putin tries to face down what he calls a rebellion, insisting his country is united behind him.
The organisers of this rebellion cannot but understand that they will be brought to justice.
The man behind it says he wasn't trying to force out President Putin and that some Russians are disappointed that he stopped.
We were going for a demonstration of our protest, not to overthrow the government in the country.
Despite the rebellion, there's no new foothold on the front line for Ukraine's soldiers. We'll report from Moscow and Kyiv tonight.
It's fairly clear at the point of entry on both sides. There's nothing that could have stopped it.
Also on the programme, how Nicola Bulley had drowned before anyone even realised she was missing. The evidence heard at her inquest today. Following in the footsteps of his mother, Prince William pledges what is called his life's ambition to end homelessness. It's not match point yet. Andy Murray tells Sky News he hopes this won't be his last Wimbledon.
You know, I know it's not going to be going on forever, but I have an idea of when I would like to finish, and it's not this year's Wimbledon.
And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello, good evening. President Putin said tonight that the organisers of what he called the weekend's rebellion would be brought to justice and that any blackmail would be doomed to failure. He was speaking after the man behind that rebellion, the mercenary boss Yevgeny Prigozhin, denied he'd planned to overthrow the government, but said many people were still supporting him. President Biden echoed other Western leaders when he said that NATO had had no role in what he called a struggle inside the Russian system. Tonight, we'll see what impact the turmoil has had on the Ukrainian battlefield and speak to our correspondent in Kyiv. But first, from Moscow, Diana Magne reports.
A late-night statement from Vladimir Putin, thanking the nation for standing united, he said, in the face of those who had brought it to the brink.
The organisers understood that this was a criminal undertaking which would split the country and weaken us, which is facing a colossal external threat. The organisers of this event were sending their troops to their death under fire and to shoot their own people. This is precisely the suicidal outcome the enemies of Russia, the neo-Nazis in Kyiv, and their Western minders wanted.
A few hours earlier, the man behind the gravest crisis in the president's 23-year rule, Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin, had broken his silence with a long audio message explaining why he'd stopped the march to Moscow.
Первый фактор – это то, что мы не хотели пролить русскую кровь. Второй фактор – мы шли для демонстрации своего протеста, а не для свержения власти в стране.
Earlier on Monday, this video of Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu, the focus of Prigozhin's wrath, was released, touring his units. No way of verifying when that was filmed, but the purpose was clear, to show him back at work and unruffled as questions swirl over his future. You'll often hear Russians, especially during tumultuous times, quote the old proverb, "Don't swap horses midstream." And Vladimir Putin will want to resist looking like he's caving into pressure, especially from a man he's branded treasonous, by reshuffling his top military command right in the middle of his war in Ukraine. On Russia's flagship talk show, 60 Minutes, Prigozhin was branded a traitor and a rebel. His march on Moscow called crazy and senseless. But Prigozhin said he'd had plenty of support from the Russian public.
Они все были счастливы, когда мы приходили и когда проходили мимо. Многие из них до сих пор пишут слова поддержки, а некоторые разочарованы в том, что мы остановились, потому что в марше справедливости, кроме нашей борьбы за существование, они видели поддержку борьбы с бюрократией и другими недугами, которые сегодня имеются в нашей стране.
Все, парни, счастливо, удачи.
Prigozhin was hardly the type to go quietly, and it would appear now as though Putin is determined to extinguish his voice for good. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Moscow.
President Putin, in his statement tonight, also claimed that Ukraine was involved in the weekend rebellion. But on the battlefield, the signs are that the turmoil in Russia has not led to any major breakthrough. Here, the Foreign Secretary said that the challenge to the Russian leader's authority was yet more evidence that his forces should withdraw. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, has this report.
Ukrainian soldiers risked their lives to save another. Under Russian fire. They reach the casualty. Then, a scramble to evacuate. The drama in Russia hasn't stopped the devastation in Ukraine. But the uprising by a mercenary boss is being seen as a sign of weakness for Vladimir Putin. The United States and its allies were keen to tell Moscow they had nothing to do with the crisis.
We gave Putin no excuse to blame this on the West or to blame this on NATO. We made clear that we were not involved. The ultimate outcome of all this remains to be seen. But no matter what comes next, I will keep making sure that our allies and our partners are closely aligned.
In the UK, the Foreign Secretary chose to highlight how the Wagner boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, publicly rubbished Putin's justification for the war in Ukraine in an act of defiance.
Prigozhin's rebellion is an unprecedented challenge to President Putin's authority, and it is clear that cracks are emerging in the Russian support for the war. Now that Russia's leadership cannot justify this war, even to each other, the only rightful course is for Putin to withdraw his troops and end this bloodshed now.
Moscow had its own message for London. It claimed these images were of a British spy plane that Russian aircraft had scrambled to intercept, as well as 2 British fighter jets near Russian airspace over the Black Sea. It all comes as a Ukrainian counter-offensive rages on, with Ukraine saying its forces have retaken more than 80 square miles of territory. It's perhaps slower progress than some had expected, on front lines to the south around Zaporizhia and in the east near Bakhmut. But the Russians have dug deep defensive lines, shown here in red, and moving forward is perilous work. This is what it looks like on the ground. The Ukrainian troops need to find a weak spot here, not just in Putin's regime. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Well, our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn is in Kyiv tonight, and Diana Magnay is, as we've seen, in Moscow. Dominic, no immediate advance then for Ukrainian forces, but what does the government there make of the rebellion inside their enemy's borders?
Well, I think they're definitely looking on and they are enjoying the chaos that's unfolding in Russia. One of Zelensky's key advisors tonight said that the speech tonight gave his verdict, saying it was a truly epoch-making address that determines the future of Russia, sarcastically mocked the way the Kremlin billed the speech, going to say the doubts are finally dispelled. Russia is waiting for a new president. So they're not really concealing their glee at what's going on. But I think in terms of the military impact, it depends on the answer to a few questions. First of all, what happens to the Wagner fighters? Are they going to be absorbed into the Russian military, which it would effectively emasculate the most effective fighting force the Russians have had during this war? What happens to the defence minister and chief of staff, Shoigu and Gerasimov, widely regarded as pretty incompetent? Are they going to be replaced, as Prigozhin wanted to happen as part of a deal done with him? And could they be replaced with more formidable enemies for Ukraine? I think the other question is what happens to the morale of the Russian soldiers who have heard over the weekend their most credible commander, Prigozhin, described the war as being fought because of lies and that being led by mentally ill scumbags, in his words. But I think you have to also accept that their morale probably wasn't that good already. I think the bottom line for the Ukrainians is what they're trying to achieve in their counteroffensive is an extremely difficult military operation. A combined arms breaching operation has not really been achieved by one army against another army of comparable ability since the Second World War. So whatever happens, I think, in Russia won't be enough to change that equation. It certainly could change what happens if they win in terms of the impact to Russia and a Ukrainian victory, but certainly not in terms of how the battle is fought. And I think that's why the Ukrainians say to the West, ignore what's going on in Russia, don't be too distracted, keep on supporting us so that we can win.
Well, to Moscow and Diana, one of the more consequential weekends of the war for Russia, at least. President Putin addressing it directly tonight. So what now?
Well, I think what he was trying to do tonight was to tell the Russian people that the situation was, the threat had been faced off and the situation was as under control as it possibly could be, whilst not alienating the thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Wagner fighters who clearly had decided to back Prigozhin in this short-lived rebellion. And make sure that they stayed on side. So he offered them a choice, which was either that they sign contracts with the Ministry of Defence or that they go home or that they go off in exile to Belarus. He said that he would offer keep his promises on that front. There was no mention in that speech of Yevgeny Prigozhin directly or what his fate is. We understand that he might be now in Minsk in Belarus, but it's not entirely clear, and he didn't give any hints in that video message that he delivered a little earlier either. But we're going to be hearing from Alexander Lukashenko, the Belarusian leader, at some point tomorrow. He was actually meant to be scheduled to be talking around about the same time as President Putin, but I think he may have been big-footed there. And I think, you know, in that speech, we heard Vladimir Putin trying to tell the Russian people that this whole threat to their existence had been fended off by their consolidation and solidarity as a society. Well, I would imagine that actually the majority of people here in Russia didn't really know about what was happening until it was all over, although they probably do now because it's been widely circulated on all the bulletins. And he may convince people that he has this all under control, but I think the key question is whether he has the backing and support of his elites. He's currently meeting with his security chiefs right now. Sergei Shoigu is there looking pretty tired, and I don't think he'll be getting rid of him anytime soon. But, you know, what are those people close to Vladimir Putin thinking now? That is the key question.
Diana in Moscow and Dominic in Kyiv. Thank you. The inquest into the death of Nicola Bulley saw video filmed by the divers who searched for her today. A pathologist told Preston Coroner's Court that she had drowned after falling into the river, which may have been caused by taking just 1 or 2 breaths of the freezing cold water in the River Wire. Martin Brunt reports.
When Nicola Bulley disappeared in January, there was a 3-week police search and huge public concern. But an inquest heard she had drowned long before anyone realised she was missing. It's believed she entered the water near this bench. A pathologist said she hadn't been drinking and no one else was involved. The water was cold, 4 degrees, and flowing faster than walking pace. A dangerous place to fall in, said a police diver in a video played to the coroner.
Those rocks constitute a wall that goes pretty much vertically straight down in the water to around 4 meters of depth. There are some trees that overhang into the water, but it's fairly clear at the point of entry on both sides. There's nothing that could have stopped her.
2 witnesses said they saw Nicola dropping her daughters off at school before she headed to the river to walk her dog. An hour or so later, both said they heard a short scream from that direction. Nurse Helen O'Neill said it was unusual at that time of day, but it wasn't an alarming scream. In my head, I had 2 females walking along by the river and one jumped out on the other. I didn't think anything of it until later on. Veronica Clayson said, I was at the tennis club and about to get into my car when I heard a scream. My immediate thought was someone was having a laugh in the graveyard. It was a scream of surprise. Other witnesses described how Nicola's dog Willow was found near the river, her harness lying in the grass. Nicola's mobile phone was on the bench. When a woman called Nicola's partner Paul, he told her she's struggling. With a fall and the shock of cold water, said another witness, Nicola would have lost consciousness within 50 seconds, maybe sooner. While police were still searching for her, they had revealed she'd had alcohol problems brought on by her struggles with the menopause. Nicola's body was recovered from the river a mile and a half downstream, 23 days after she vanished. The inquest is being held over 2 days with extra security. The public seats were full, reflecting the huge interest when Nicola disappeared. On day 2, Nicola's partner, Paul Ansell, is expected to give evidence. Martin Brunt, Sky News, Preston.
A man who may have led one of the most notorious racist killings in British history avoided justice for nearly 3 decades, police admitted today. The mother of Stephen Lawrence said she was infuriated that Matthew White, who died 2 years ago, had not faced any charges because of failings by the police. Sky's Emma Birchley reports.
Gary Dobson and David Norris, the only 2 men eventually convicted of the murder of Stephen Lawrence, as he waited for a bus in southeast London 30 years ago. 5 men were named as suspects in the unprovoked racist attack, but there was always talk of a 6th, a fair-haired man. Now it's been confirmed that that man was Matthew White. But it's also emerged that police failings meant it took 20 years to talk to a relative of White who'd reported his presence at the scene.
I'm shocked, I'm angry, but if I'm frank, I'm not surprised. I mean, this family, the Lawrence family, have had to go through years and years of discovering yet further failings from the police service, deep institutional, racially driven failings.
White was arrested twice but never charged. There was not believed to be enough evidence. He died in 2021. For Stephen's mother, Doreen Lawrence, it's prompted fresh fury that no officer's been punished for their role in an investigation deemed to be hampered by racism and alleged corruption. In a statement, she said, "What is infuriating about this latest revelation is that the man who is said to have led the murderous attack on my son has evaded justice because of police failures, and yet not a single police officer has faced or will ever face action." It's prompted yet another apology from the Metropolitan Police, acknowledging too many mistakes with a lasting impact were made. A decision is yet to be taken as to whether criminal charges will be brought against 4 former officers for their actions. Emma Birchley, Sky News.
The Prime Minister admitted there is work to do in fixing the NHS after a major study revealed that it underperformed compared to other healthcare systems. Rishi Sunak also hinted that he may ignore the independent pay review bodies for public sector workers if they recommend pay rises which don't reflect the economic context, namely inflation. Our political correspondent Rob Powell has this report.
We're rolling this out.
Announcing a new screening programme for lung cancer, the Prime Minister out in Nottingham today. But still locked in a standoff with some health unions, Rishi Sunak also hinted he may overrule pay recommendations for junior doctors if he deems them too high.
People need to recognise the economic context we're in, and I'm going to make the decisions that are the right ones for the country. That's not always easy, people may not like that, but those are the right things for everybody, that we get a grip of inflation, and that means the government not excessively borrowing too much money and being responsible with public sector pay settlements.
They look awful. Also out on the wards, Labour adopting an altogether blunter tone.
It's definitely the worst hospital I've ever been in.
The Shadow Health Secretary attacking the government for a lack of investment, but less clear on the vexed issue of pay.
I want to see the independent pay review body process back up and running with the full confidence of everyone involved. The real risk to the NHS now isn't just that staff walk out for another 5 days of strike action, but they walk out of the NHS altogether.
From strikes and staffing to hospital spending, the NHS and the government are facing challenges in the short term and the long.
In the months ahead, further walkouts by doctors may frustrate the Prime Minister's promise to curb waiting lists. But there's also the risk of pay and conditions causing more health workers to leave, a worrying prospect for a service already short on staff.
Analysis by the charity The King's Fund has found the UK has 3 practising doctors per 1,000 people, while Germany and Denmark both have around 4.5. On nurses, the UK figure is also low, at 8.5 per 1,000 people, compared to 12 in Germany and 10 in Denmark. The report's author says this, alongside a lack of capital investment, means the UK is lagging behind on treatable health conditions.
It's a combination of not enough funding and poor planning. The budget for the NHS has been increasing, but by nowhere near enough if you wanted this rapid growth of doctors and nurses. But the second thing is how we've organised workforce planning in this country simply hasn't been good enough. It was split along lots of different national bodies. No one was really accountable.
Rishi Sunak will try to address this when he unveils a long-term workforce plan later this week. That won't help with many immediate NHS issues, though. Political problems focused onto a health service already under pressure. Rob Powell, Sky News in Westminster.
Princess Diana was well known for her work with the homeless charity Centrepoint. Today, her son and heir to the throne said he wanted to end homelessness in 5 years. It's a noble cause for Prince William to take on, although it does also touch on the province of politics, as our royal correspondent Laura Bundock reports.
6 locations in 2 days, as the Prince of Wales launches his life's ambition, a plan to end homelessness.
I first visited a homeless shelter when I was 11 with my mother. The visits we made together left a deep and lasting impression. Over the next 5 years, we have a unique opportunity to develop innovative new solutions and scale their tangible impact. This will inspire belief throughout the UK and beyond that homelessness can be ended for good.
Newport in South Wales is one of the 6 areas targeted by the project. Stuck in a cycle of temporary housing, Wayne's been homeless here for over a decade.
Nearly 8 years clean, but I'm still struggling with homelessness regarding to get a flat. So basically I'm in a pod. It's like a shipping container. I'm just waiting on the council now to basically move me forward to get my own property basically, and that's what I'm heading for, and hopefully get a full-time job.
All Wayne wants is a home, but it's years away, and after so long waiting, he doesn't think homelessness will ever end.
Look how long it's been trying to get rid of homelessness now. No offence, I don't think we'll ever get rid of homelessness, but I wish we could, but it's not going to happen.
With well-known faces, the Prince's project will collaborate and convene to find local solutions to end homelessness. A bold pledge, say some, given his position of enormous privilege.
Prince William is a huge landowner. He has multiple homes. Is he really the right person to be standing there and saying, I can solve homelessness?
Who's the right person to solve and end homelessness? We've all got to do it. He's put his hand up and he said, look, I'm committing to play my part. You could make a real gesture. Imagine giving over a house, giving over a palace. That really wouldn't make a dent into the situation. We need structural, systemic change.
All right, well done you guys, honestly.
It is a political issue for a prince who sits above politics. But he says it's not about policy, just action and positive change. Laura Bundock, Sky News, Newport.
One of Britain's most senior medical officials has told the COVID inquiry that public health resources across the country were probably not good enough to cope with the pandemic. Professor Dame Jenny Harries, the chief executive of the UK Health Security Agency, admitted that services in some areas were under-resourced.
It is fair to say, and I'm pretty confident it's evidence, that some of the health protection skills were denuded, particularly from the smaller local authorities, where you perhaps have one director of public health, one consultant and one other, really quite small.
The authorities in Myanmar have set fire to £350 million worth of drugs to mark International Anti-Drug Trafficking Day. The country is a major producer and exporter of methamphetamine and the world's second largest opium and heroin producer after Afghanistan. Former Scotland football manager Craig Brown has died at the age of 82 after a short illness. Craig Brown was the last manager to lead Scotland to a World Cup final, taking charge of the team in France in 1998. He was Scotland manager for 70 games, making him the country's longest-serving manager. Well, it's 7 years since Sir Andy Murray last won Wimbledon, and even his most ardent fans might accept that would be a tall order now. Britain's most successful modern player, though, isn't yet planning on hanging up his racket, he's told Sky News. He was speaking to my colleague, Jackie Beltrão.
Heading into a 15th Wimbledon and his third with a metal hip, Andy Murray is confident he can still challenge the world's best. But realistically, could this be the 36-year-old's last outing at the championships?
I hope not, but you never know. If I was to have another big injury or something happen with the metal hit, that would be me finished. I want to finish on my own terms. I want to finish on the court whilst I still feel I can do myself justice and I'm playing at a really high level. And I definitely feel I can do that for a couple more years.
Well, Andy Murray has been grinding out the wins on the lower-tier challenger circuit. His great childhood rival, Novak Djokovic, has just won a record-breaking 23rd Grand Slam title at the French Open and will go for a record-equalling 8th title here at Wimbledon. So does that make Novak the greatest of all time?
There's arguments there for him to be the greatest of all time. Those three guys on their surfaces. That's Rafa on the clay. I mean, I don't think anyone can doubt he's the best clay court player of all time. For me, Novak is clearly the best hard court player of all time, and then grass is kind of still to be decided between probably him and Roger. And but yeah, what all those guys have achieved is amazing. If you just go on Grand Slam titles, then you would have to give that to Novak. But for me, it's slightly more nuanced.
The Russians and Belarusians returned to Wimbledon for the first time in 2 years. And while Murray doesn't have a problem facing players from those countries, it's caused great upheaval within the sport.
I mean, I have competed against players from those countries, and I wouldn't say that has affected me. I mean, I've the utmost sympathy for all of the Ukrainian players that are playing and are put in that situation. And also the tournaments are, they're also they've been put in a really difficult situation.
Murray won't be seeded at Wimbledon. His ranking isn't high enough, but the two-time champion remains a huge draw around here. Jackie Beltrão, Sky News, Wimbledon.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including this story from the Daily Star, giving advice to the Wagner leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, on his personal safety after appearing to challenge President Putin. Best stay away, they say, from open windows. Well, tonight we're joined by the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Crerar, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. That in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. Vladimir Putin has summoned his security officials to discuss an attempted rebellion by the Wagner group of mercenaries and has insisted that Russia is united behind him. The inquest into Nicola Bulley's death hears that she drowned and there was no alcohol in her blood when she fell into the river wire. And the fury of the mother of Stephen Lawrence that a sixth suspect may have evaded justice for her son's murder. Hello there, you are watching the press preview. A first look then at what is on the front pages. Time to see what is making the headlines with the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Crerar, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. Welcome to both of you. So let's take a look at the front pages then, shall we? The Guardian leads on that statement from Vladimir Putin earlier, where he claimed that his enemies wanted Russia to choke in bloody civil strife. The head of the Wagner militia has denied trying to overthrow the Russian government. That's on the front of the Financial Times. Same story, there is some safety advice for Yevgeny Prigozhin on the front page of The Star. Best stay away from open windows. In other news, a call for bank branches to retain their presence on the high street makes the top story for The Express. The Metro leading on the inquest into the death of Nicola Bulley, which heard that she drowned after falling into a river. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. We're joined then by Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. And Pippa, we've heard, haven't we, from both Prigozhin and Putin today, possibly different stories. But can Putin, regain his hard man image, do you think, after the extraordinary events of this weekend?
I think it's going to be very hard for him. I mean, what has happened in Russia, we're still trying to, exactly what's happened, we're still trying to find out, and isn't entirely clear, although we have had a bit more information, like you say, Anna, in the form of an 11-minute telegram address from Prigozhin earlier on. And then, of course, Vladimir Putin's really quite angry television statement to the Russian people. And what seems to have happened, and it's obviously we're analysts much more expert than Harry or I are poring over all of this, but what seems to have happened is that a fairly sort of I wouldn't quite say standard, but a dispute between two senior figures in the Russian, the Moscow regime, the defense minister and obviously the head of Wagner, have their conflict, which I think in other times might have been resolved with a judgment from Putin on which side he fell on, and obviously the dispute was based around Wagner and Prigozhin's feeling that the defense minister and the defense ministry, Russian army, hadn't prosecuted the invasion of Ukraine in the way that it should have done, and that didn't happen. Putin didn't come down with a judgment, and so Wagner marched on Moscow with these extraordinary images and extraordinary circumstances that we saw over the weekend, which have, I think, irrevocably rocked Putin's position and, given the ongoing uncertainty, made it very difficult for the rest of us, let alone those in Russia, to see exactly how this is going to play out, how this power play is going to culminate.
Yes, and the Financial Times picking up on the Prigozhin statement this evening rather than the Putin one, with the denial that he tried to oust Putin in his 11-minute voice recording. He said his goal was to protest against a recent decision to disband Wagner and to demonstrate the weakness of Russia's domestic defences. We didn't have the goal of toppling the existing regime. From Putin's point of view, though, his statement, his video statement tonight, said, "I emphasised from the very beginning of the events all the necessary decisions were immediately taken to neutralise the threat that had arisen, to protect the constitutional order, the life and security of our citizens," which seems so strange when the Wagner Group got so far, Harry. What's your thoughts of what happened over the weekend and what we're to make of it?
Look, firstly, as Pippa said, caveat this with, most Western intelligence agencies are still grappling with what exactly happened at the weekend. We don't know. This is obviously a very fluid situation and a live moving situation still. All this talk of a deal done, obviously Prigozhin was able to flee, but in his statement tonight, Putin appears to have revoked any suggestion that he's off the hook for this. It took Trotsky 14 years of looking over his shoulder before the ice pick finally came all the way in Mexico. Belarus is not that far from Moscow, so I'm not imagining the former now Wagner boss is sleeping too easily at the moment. And having watched that statement from Putin, that's not a man that looks like he's going to back down. One thing I would say is, though, do not underestimate that Putin. It's clear that that Wagner column, as it was advancing up towards the capital, was not being joined in the way that it needed to be if this was going to be a successful putsch. All this idea that now it wasn't a coup, that's not what the guy was saying at the time. He was saying, in fact, the exact opposite. He made some pretty bellicose, direct threats to the regime, to very senior figures in it. And what's clear is that spy agencies, FSB, the GRU, whoever, did not join with Wagner. In fact, the Russian military hate Wagner because they've embarrassed them along the way on many occasions over the last few years. So they were kind of caught with their trousers down halfway to the capital and decided to run away. So I wouldn't be sleeping too easily if I was exiled in Belarus tonight.
Well, absolutely. That's the front page of the Star, isn't it? Best stay away from open windows. There is a ruthlessness, certainly, that President Putin has shown anybody who he deems to have committed treason against the nation. Deal or no deal, we'll see what happens. Where is Prigozhin now? Is he in Minsk? Because there are some reports. What happens to his Wagner foot soldiers? Will they take up the offer of merging with the Russian Ministry of Defence? Will they go home to their families? Will they go to Belarus? Have they lost the best fighting force that Russia has so far, presented itself with, Pippa?
Well, Prigozhin, in his remarks earlier, seemed to suggest that his troops would not sign contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defence. Now, as far as I can make out, he remains popular with the Wagner troops, and has a sort of a strong personal following. So without him on the scene, or without his blessing, it's unlikely that substantial numbers of Wagner troops will sign up to the Ministry of Defence. Not least because it's run by Sergei Shoigu, who of course is the individual who most has most upset Prigozhin and the Wagner group for his handling of the Ukraine conflict. So he seemed to be suggesting, Prigozhin, this is that the Wagner troops might actually come to Belarus with him, and Putin also, similarly in his address, suggested that might be an option for them. There's some suggestion that Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, might allow the Wagner group to train on their territory. That obviously then opens up the prospect of the conflict moving into Ukraine from the north of Ukraine, directly from Belarus, which is obviously going to be something on the ground in Ukraine, which Zelensky and his generals will be watching very closely. It is all just shrouded in a great deal of uncertainty. But as we've seen, as Harry says, anybody that sort of challenges Putin directly, even those, including Prigozhin, who were once seen as a real sort of loyal supporter, better watch out. I mean, we saw last September a prominent Russian oil oligarch ending up falling out of the sixth floor of a Russian hospital, a Moscow hospital, and he was just the latest in a series of senior Russian individuals who have in some way or other angered or stood up to the Putin regime, reaching a similar fate. So, that's the front page of the Star. So, as we've already said, I don't think Prigozhin is going to be sleeping very well in his bed tonight in Minsk or wherever else he actually is.
Up on, what Russia's enemies wanted, the organisers of the rebellion, having betrayed their country, their people, betrayed those who were drawn into the crime, pushed them to death under fire to shoot at their own. He called it fratricide that the enemies of Russia wanted in Kyiv, the neo-Nazis in Kyiv and their Western patrons and all sorts of national traitors. I mean, the words of Putin this evening. But indeed, yes, I mean, Ukraine would have, rubbed its hands with glee at this activity. It's all these extra and incidental elements that have made the war so extraordinary in recent months. The Kakhovka Dam, for one, the raids into Belgorod by the Free Russia troops, and now this, whatever it was, this rebellion, Harry, it didn't go on long enough, really, for Ukraine to feel the benefit on the front line of this action.
Yeah, I think one thing that was quite clear was that the troops stationed on the front were not diverted back to the motherland to try and fight this. It was, as you say, over too quickly. But, I mean, as a loss of face for Putin, this cannot be played down. I think the West has sort of agreed this joint line that it shows real cracks, but have stopped short of saying it's going to be fatal. If anything, it could actually have the opposite effect of forcing an already fairly ruthless leader to crack down even further on his country. I have to say, if you're a Russian citizen who hasn't got, watching television over the last few months and years, is being told everything's going brilliantly, to then suddenly see your leader on television with that quite blood-curdling series of statements, the one on Saturday morning and the one tonight, it's very hard to contain the idea that everything's going tickety-boo when you have to go on television and say, actually, blood was being spilt, 6 planes were being shot down, there was fratricide going on in the country. So I wonder how, as a sort of PR moment for the Putin regime, whether that's going to be the real damage and that people aren't necessarily going to believe a single word he's saying anymore.
And just as I spoke, in fact, I see a drop on the Reuters news agency, Zelensky saying, we are making advances in all sectors. It is a happy day. I don't know any more context than that, but we'll certainly see. We know that he visited the front line as well himself today. So, this story continues, obviously. Let's move on, though, if we can, to the Stephen Lawrence case. Clearly of great distress once again to Stephen's family, Pippa, the idea that, yet again, justice was not served in this case.
Yeah, I mean, it's very sad, this story, isn't it? I mean, your heart just breaks for Neville and Doreen Lawrence, Stephen's parents, who, after all these years, 30 years, are still having to go through the turmoil of feeling that justice hasn't been done for their son and that they can't even be at peace. This was an official investigation has concluded that Scotland Yard had information that could and should have been handed to the inquiry into Lawrence's murder, but failed to disclose it. And the Met. This obviously comes after the Met. It emerged that the 6th suspect in his killing was identified. And Stephen Lawrence's father and Dwayne Brooks, who was there in that street in Elton when he was attacked and murdered, had called for the Met to reopen the investigation. So this was an individual called Matthew White. He died in 2021, and the police had twice looked into him, but seemed to slip through their fingers. And it's obviously once again raises huge questions about the original Met inquiry. It concerns also about what the Met told the Macpherson inquiry, which was the inquiry that obviously took place in the years following the Lawrence case, and concluded that the Met was institutionally racist, and actually led to some really quite profound changes in British policing in general, not just in the Met. As a result of the Macpherson report. But there's questions that even the Met maybe hadn't been completely straight with what they knew and didn't know when it came to dealing with Macpherson. So, I just feel really sad about it from the family's perspective, that this is not yet been laid to rest. That there are obviously other individuals who were involved in this, that they haven't yet been brought to justice. And still many unanswered questions for the Lawrence family, and many questions that the Met itself still has to answer on this as well.
Indeed so. Lots more still to come. Next part of our programme. Stay there, both of you, if you can, including the six-figure sum for every migrant sent to Rwanda. More on that after the break.
Well, he's got a convening power that very few other people have, a convening superpower, really, isn't it? To bring people together to solve what is still not really recognised as one of the biggest challenges we face as a country. And I think he's shining a light on the size of the problem. He's shining a light on the partnership needed to end homelessness. And he's also showing leadership, which I think is really important because actually, you know, we really do need action on this. And that leadership from the Prince, I think, will make a really big difference. What we've found at Shelter in our work at local level is, you know, the Prince is absolutely right, actually. It does take all agencies in a local area to come together to solve this problem. But it does also take some government action, and we can't ignore that. It's not his role to push for that. That's our role to push for that. But it is really important that all political parties understand this needs to be a big issue in the run-up to the election, and all the parties need to understand that it's going to take some serious will, political will from government. So in Finland, there are two main, I guess, things. First of all, they put resources around the person. They don't expect people to go from door to door to door to door, retelling their story hundreds of times in order to get a little bit of help from each agency. They're much better coordinated at local level, and I think that's something the Prince can do. But there's another thing in Finland too, which is that they do have social housing. They have homes to put people in, and that's a significant difference between Finland and the UK. So apparently, the Prince is committed to building social homes on his estate, and I guess that's what I mean by leadership. That would be absolutely fantastic to prove that social homes is A, what the country needs, B, achievable, and C, that people in local communities want this. People don't want their communities hollowed out because young people can't afford to live there anymore. You know, communities need decent, high-quality social homes, and that, I hope, if he demonstrates that, that will be hugely powerful.
Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Crerar, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. Welcome back to both of you. Let's take a look, shall we, Pippa, at The Guardian. The costing for Rwanda and the contrast with what would happen if refugees and asylum seekers were held here. What are the figures?
Yeah, so this is a sort of a big reveal, if you like. The government have been under pressure for some time to publish their impact assessment of their illegal migration bill, and they did so today. And it suggests that the cost of sending a single person seeking asylum to Rwanda could be almost £170,000. Suella Braverman points out that the government could save, as far as she's concerned, £100,000 for every person deterred from coming here. But the impact assessment also points out that there's little to no evidence that policy changes such as this deter people from leaving their homes and coming to the UK, or indeed elsewhere. This is not just a UK phenomenon, obviously. So the conclusion seems to be that it would cost us an awful lot of money to send people to Rwanda. Obviously, the government's already spent, I think it's about £140 million on this arrangement under Boris Johnson, and no doubt there'll be further payments if the scheme gets up and running. But it's going to be a pivotal week, because not only have we had this impact assessment, but we're expecting the Court of Appeal decision on Thursday on whether the legislation is legal or not, sending over women and children as well to Rwanda. And also on, I think it's on Thursday, and then on Wednesday, the bill is back in the House of Lords, where of course it has run into quite a lot of challenges already, and it's expected potentially to run into more.
And do they know, Harry, if it'll work? Certainly the quote is that the official assessment warns the deterrent effect claimed by ministers is highly uncertain.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point is this hasn't been tried before. This is a new and novel approach, as the policy has been pretty clear to state. It hasn't been allowed to, you can't cry this doesn't work when you spent every single fibre of your time and being trying to block it from being tried. So it is a bit of a confused sort of attack tonight from the usual suspects and critics of this policy that, it says it doesn't work. No, it says it hasn't been tried. So there's a bit of a difference there. Look, it is going to be expensive. This isn't meant to be a cost-efficient way of holding people. It's meant to act as a deterrent. So it basically says if you can drive down the rate of people arriving in this country illegally by 37%, then it becomes cost neutral, because obviously the cost of not doing anything means that the £7 billion figure that we use for housing asylum seekers at the moment will rise to £11 billion a year. So to me, it's a sort of throw of the dice for the government. They've never really said it's anything other than that. But what is the alternative? Do we just do nothing, throw open our borders, watch things go up? We're not going to get a returns agreement with France. They've got their own immigration problems. Everyone sort of harks back to this great Dublin Accord that we had as members of the EU. It didn't work at the time. It was rubbish. There was a couple of hundred people sent back to various countries a year on it. So something fundamentally has to change. And the government are basically saying, well, look, if it's not this, then what? And I suspect what will happen is, any incoming government is going to be greeted with the same problems after the next election. So, Labour saying they're going to throw a couple of £100 million to the NCA to, do extra gang policing. If they come into power, as it looks like they're going to next year, they're going to find that's not going to cut it either. So something has to give. And I suspect, our readers are quite interested in this policy. They're not as critical about it as some people are. And actually, public support for this policy, despite knowing it's expensive, remains fairly strong for a tactic.
In fact, I see, you're talking about next year, page 2 of The Sun suggests that most Tory members think Sir Keir Starmer is going to win the next general election. A survey by the Conhome website for grassroots activists found 30% were resigned to a Labour majority, 29% to a Labour-led coalition. That's 60% of Tory supporters thinking that they are effectively toast, or their party is. End thought, Pippa, the photographs, which are on many a front page and inside too, of the chain reaction, or the chain mail of the Fleabag star Phoebe Waller-Bridge. A chain reaction is how this paper describes it, for the premiere tonight with the co-star of Harrison Ford, aged 80, who plays the adventurer in this film.
Yes, Indiana Jones is back. She looks amazing, doesn't she? I'm delighted because I'm a massive Indiana Jones fan. Although I have to say, I watched them most regularly when I was my children's age. So whether Indiana Jones, whether Harrison Ford in his 80s can crack it, whether he can crack the whip and sort of leap over obstacles and speed off in cars and do whatever stunts he did previously, we'll have to see. And then my children are excited about seeing it. But yeah, he's not quite the sort of live and energetic hero that he was as a younger man. But I think the allure of Harrison Ford and Indiana Jones anyway will make me, amongst others, tune in and watch it.
OK. Well, I'm sure we all will. Pippa, Harry, thank you both very much indeed. See you next time. Thank you. See them for the 11th. The weather's now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So cooler this week, quite unsettled. Some parts look like staying mainly dry. Quite a warm start tomorrow. Sunny spells for much of southern and eastern Britain. Most other places overcast with outbreaks of rain.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.